Long before any human breath warmed the air, the planet moved in a way that felt undecided, as if it had not yet chosen what it wanted to become. The land did not rest. Continents crept and collided, tearing open mountains and swallowing seas. Volcanoes spoke more often than living creatures, and their ash drifted across skies that changed colour without warning. Rain could vanish for centuries, then return with enough force to erase entire regions. Nothing about this world suggested stability, and nothing about it hinted that a thinking species was expected to arrive. Life existed everywhere, yet nowhere did it seem secure. Forests expanded, then retreated. Deserts bloomed briefly with green before turning back to dust. Oceans warmed and cooled in long, uneven rhythms, killing vast populations and allowing others to surge forward in their place. Survival here did not reward foresight or reflection. It favoured speed, armour, poison, and numbers. Creatures that lived well were those that reacted instantly, not those that hesitated to consider possibilities. For hundreds of millions of years, the planet ran this same pattern. Species appeared, adapted just enough to endure, then vanished when the balance shifted again. Some lasted longer than others, but none left a permanent mark. Their bones sank into stone, their existence compressed into thin layers that would one day confuse distant observers. From the outside, the story looked productive, even successful. Life was diverse, abundant, and relentless. Yet it was also forgetful. Nothing learned from one age was carried meaningfully into the next. Intelligence, as humans later defined it, was not a goal written into this system. There was no visible path leading towards self-awareness or abstract thought. Many creatures thrived without anything resembling it. Dinosaurs ruled for ages without questioning their world. Insects built complex societies guided entirely by instinct, unchanged across vast stretches of time. Even mammals, clever in small ways, survived primarily by hiding, fleeing, or overpowering rivals. The planet did not seem to reward curiosity. It rewarded fitting in quickly or disappearing entirely. From this perspective, the emergence of a thinking species was not inevitable. It was unlikely. The conditions required for sustained learning, long childhoods, cooperation beyond kin, memory across generations, were fragile traits in a violent environment. Any creature that paused to think risked being eaten. Any body that invested energy in a large brain sacrificed strength elsewhere. Any population that grew slowly faced extinction when disaster arrived suddenly, as it always did. And disaster was constant. Ice sheets advanced without negotiation, grinding landscapes flat and forcing life toward shrinking refuges. Asteroids arrived without warning, rewriting the rules of survival in a single afternoon. Oxygen itself once poisoned the planet, killing most of what lived before it became essential. The Earth had no obligation to protect continuity. It changed because change was what it did. In this long pre-human silence, nothing suggested that reflection, memory, or meaning were necessary additions. The planet functioned without them. Evolution refined bodies into specialized tools, each perfectly shaped for a narrow moment in time. When that moment passed, the tools were discarded. There was no archive of experience, no awareness of loss. Extinction was not a tragedy, it was routine. Seen this way, the later appearance of humans feels less like a planned outcome and more like a question the planet accidentally asked. Why would a system built on efficiency and replacement allow something so slow, so vulnerable, and so uncertain to begin forming? Why risk creating a creature that might not simply adapt to the world, but attempt to understand it? At this early stage, there was no promise that such a risk would pay off. Nothing in Earth's history guaranteed that intelligence would be useful, let alone dominant. It may never have appeared at all, and the planet would have continued turning just the same. Yet somewhere within this unstable, indifferent world, conditions aligned just enough to allow a fragile experiment to begin. One that did not yet know it was an experiment, and one that could still fail without leaving much behind. That quiet, dangerous Earth did not prepare itself for humans. It did not wait for them. It simply continued changing as it always had. And within that motion, evolution took its first uncertain step towards something it had never tried before. When the first of these primates began spending more time on the ground, nothing about the decision looked like progress. The forests they relied on were thinning, breaking into patches separated by open land that offered little cover. Moving between them meant exposure, and exposure on the open ground came with consequences. Tall grasses hid predators. The sun burned without mercy. The safety of branches where danger could often be seen and escaped was replaced by a horizon filled with uncertainty. Standing upright solved one problem while creating several more. It freed the hands, but it placed the most vulnerable parts of the body where teeth and claws could reach them easily. The chest, the throat, the soft belly, areas once protected by 4-point balance and quick climbing now faced forward. Movement became slower and more deliberate. Speed, once a defense, was reduced. Strength did not increase to compensate. There was no sudden advantage to justify the change, only a gradual commitment to a posture that made retreat more difficult. Fur, once a barrier against cold and injury, thinned as bodies changed. Skin became exposed to weather, insects, and sun. Nights grew colder. Days became exhausting. These creatures had not grown sharper claws or longer teeth to offset their vulnerability. They carried no armor. They were not dominant hunters. In almost every physical sense, they became easier to kill. Predators noticed. Big cats, scavengers, and birds of prey did not see a future thinker rising from the grass. They saw prey that could not sprint for long distances and could not climb quickly enough to escape. Survival required constant awareness, yet these primates lacked the instincts that guided other animals effortlessly. Fear alone was no longer enough. Reaction time mattered, and theirs was unremarkable. What made this stage dangerous was not just weakness, but imbalance. Evolution stripped away familiar protections before providing anything new in return. There was no intelligence yet capable of planning or cooperation, no language to warn others, no tools to even the odds. The body had changed first, and the mind lagged behind, leaving a gap where extinction waited patiently. This was not an improvement measured in comfort or safety. It was a narrowing path. Every step taken upright committed the species further, reducing the option to return to the trees. Muscles adapted, bones reshaped, balance shifted permanently. What had started as occasional standing became a defining trait, locking these primates into a form that demanded new solutions they did not yet possess. Food was harder to reach. Roots required digging. Carrion had to be defended or stolen. Scavenging meant arriving late, when stronger animals still lingered nearby. Each meal carried risk. Each injury threatened infection or death. Children required more care than before, unable to cling and travel easily. Groups that could not stay together vanished quickly. There was no grand reward at this stage, only persistence. The broken ape survived not because it was superior, but because it endured long enough for chance to continue working. Populations remained small and scattered, vulnerable to drought, disease, and competition. Many lineages likely ended here, erased before leaving clear traces, their brief experiments in upright life forgotten. What makes this moment remarkable is not that it succeeded, but that it was allowed to continue at all. Evolution rarely protects weakness unless it senses potential, yet here it tolerated a form that was worse at nearly everything it once did well. It was as if the process accepted short-term failure in exchange for an uncertain long-term possibility. Intelligence had not yet arrived to justify the cost. There was no awareness of what was being built. These primates did not know they were changing the future of life on Earth. They were simply responding day by day to a world that no longer supported the old ways. And in doing so, they became something unfinished, no longer well suited for the past, and not yet equipped for what lay ahead. Time did not reward this fragile form with calm. Instead, the world grew harsher, as if testing how much instability it could endure before breaking. Long dry periods stretched across regions that once supported scattered populations, shrinking water sources and thinning the plants and animals they depended on. Rivers shifted course or disappeared entirely. Familiar paths became useless. Groups that failed to move at the right moment found themselves surrounded by emptiness. Cold followed heat with little warning. Ice advanced from the poles, reshaping landscapes and compressing habitable zones into narrow corridors. The air grew drier and sharper. Food became seasonal, then unreliable, then absent. In some eras, volcanic eruptions darkened the sky for years at a time, lowering temperatures and disrupting ecosystems far from the eruption itself. Ash settled into lungs and water sources, turning survival into a daily calculation with no margin for error. During these swings, numbers fell to levels that should have ended the story. Entire regions went silent. What had once been a loose network of related populations collapsed into isolated pockets, separated by distance and hostile terrain. Genetic diversity narrowed. Injuries that might once have been survivable became fatal when help was too far away. Children were born into scarcity, and many never reached maturity. At the lowest points, the total population may have dropped to only a few thousand individuals. Not tribes or nations, simply scattered bands clinging to what little remained. This was not dominance. It was persistence measured in small fires kept alive against wind and rain. Any single catastrophe could have erased them entirely. A new pathogen, a failed migration, a prolonged famine. The margin between survival and disappearance was thin enough to vanish without record. Unlike many animals, these early humans could not simply wait out disaster through instinct alone. They required learning, memory, and cooperation, yet these traits were still developing and unreliable. Mistakes were costly. Choosing the wrong season to move or trusting an unstable food source could doom an entire group. There were no second chances, and no backups waiting elsewhere. What is striking is how often the gamble nearly failed. This was not a smooth ascent, but a repeated brush with oblivion. Evolution did not shield this species from pressure, it intensified it. Each environmental shock stripped away the less adaptable, leaving behind those who could tolerate uncertainty, share resources, and endure prolonged stress. Survival favoured not strength, but flexibility. In these bottleneck moments, the future of humanity rested on choices made by individuals who could not have understood their importance. A decision to follow a shoreline instead of an inland route, a willingness to share food rather than hoard it, a tolerance for strangers when isolation would have been safer in the short term. These were not moral choices yet, just practical ones, but they shaped which traits persisted. The danger was not only external. Small populations risked turning inward, losing variation and resilience. Yet movement, however limited, continued. Groups crossed paths. Knowledge in its earliest form passed between them. Simple techniques, habits, and warnings accumulated slowly, fragile as everything else. Unlike physical traits, these could spread faster than genes, offering a narrow advantage in a collapsing world. Still, nothing guaranteed continuation. For long stretches, it would have been reasonable to assume the experiment had failed. Other hominins appeared and vanished. Some were stronger, others faster, some better suited to specific environments. They too struggled against the same forces and often disappeared entirely, leaving only fragments behind. The line leading to modern humans was not obviously superior, only stubbornly present. This was the phase where the risk became undeniable. Evolution had invested time and energy into a creature that repeatedly approached extinction. From a purely efficient perspective, abandoning the attempt would have made sense. Yet the process continued, allowing this vulnerable lineage to pass through catastrophe after catastrophe, altered but not erased. If the story had ended here, the planet would not have noticed the absence. Forest would have regrown, ice would have retreated, new species would have filled the gaps. That it did not end here is what makes this moment stand apart, a point where survival was no longer expected, and continuation itself became the rarest outcome of all. Out of those narrow escapes came a change that made survival even more demanding. The body began redirecting its resources inward, feeding a growing organ that offered no immediate protection. The brain expanded quietly without ceremony, drawing energy away from muscles, immune response, and physical endurance. It did not announce its purpose. It simply demanded more calories, more rest, more time, at a moment when none of those were guaranteed. This shift transformed hunger from an occasional discomfort into a constant presence. To sustain a larger brain, early humans needed richer food, more frequently and in greater variety. Missing meals was no longer just unpleasant, it became dangerous. Fat reserves were limited. Fasting weakened not only the body but the mind itself. Thinking slowed. Coordination suffered. The very trait that was beginning to set humans apart became the first to fail under stress. Feeding this organ required trade-offs that reshaped the entire life cycle. Growth slowed. Childhood stretched longer than in any other species. Infants were born less developed, their heads too large to allow further maturation before birth. They required years of care before contributing anything in return. During this long dependence, every child represented both hope and risk. Protecting them meant carrying extra weight, sharing scarce food, and delaying movement. Losing them meant wasted investment in an already precarious existence. For groups living at the edge of survival, this was a dangerous commitment. A broken leg or a poor hunting season now threatened not just individuals, but future generations. Other animals matured quickly and reproduced efficiently. Humans did neither. Their strategy depended on surviving long enough for learning to accumulate. But learning took time, and time was something the environment rarely offered. The brain's energy demands also limited physical performance. Endurance existed, but peak strength did not. Recovery from injury was slow. Illness lingered longer. Every calorie burned in thought was a calorie unavailable for immediate survival. In moments of crisis, intelligence did not always help. Overthinking could delay action. Memory could amplify fear. Anticipating danger sometimes weakened resolve rather than sharpening it. At this stage, intelligence was not yet the decisive advantage it would become. It arrived unevenly, without instruction. Curiosity could lead individuals into unfamiliar territory. Experimentation with new foods carried the risk of poisoning. Social complexity introduced conflict, jealousy, and distraction. Awareness of loss and threat added psychological weight unknown to other animals. Survival was no longer only physical, it became emotional and mental as well. Yet the process did not reverse. Once begun, the expansion could not easily be undone. A smaller brain would have meant abandoning the slow accumulation of skills and social memory that was just beginning to form. Evolution accepted the cost and continued the experiment, despite the mounting risks. The organism was becoming less efficient in the short term, betting on benefits that had not fully appeared. This period reshaped how humans related to one another. Dependency increased. Cooperation became less optional. Caring for the young, the injured, and the elderly was no longer an act of excess. It was a requirement for continuity. Knowledge lived within individuals and disappeared when they did. Protecting minds became as important as protecting bodies. The danger remained constant. A run of bad seasons could wipe out decades of slow learning. Entire traditions could vanish with a single generation lost. There was no redundancy yet, no widespread sharing of accumulated experience. Each group carried its own fragile archive, stored in memory rather than stone. In choosing this path, evolution placed humans in a narrow corridor between brilliance and collapse. The brain promised something unprecedented, but it demanded trust before proof. For a long time, it made life harder, not easier. Intelligence, still incomplete and unrefined, weighed heavily on a species already burdened by uncertainty. That it survived this stage at all suggests not inevitability, but persistence in the face of an experiment that cost more than it gave, at least at first. Control over fire did not arrive as a sudden revelation, but as a fragile relationship, one that could be lost as easily as it was gained. At first it was borrowed, not owned, taken from lightning-split trees or smouldering ground and guarded with care that bordered on fear. Flames were unpredictable, capable of warmth and destruction in equal measure. To keep them alive required attention, memory, and cooperation. Fire demanded responsibility long before it offered comfort. Once maintained, its effects reached far beyond heat. Cooked food softened fibers and released energy that raw plants and meat could not easily provide. Meals became easier to digest, allowing more calories to be drawn from the same resources. Jaws and teeth no longer carried the full burden of processing food. The body began to change more slowly now, not because it had reached perfection, but because behavior had started solving problems anatomy once had to address. Fire altered safety in subtle ways. Predators hesitated at its edge. Darkness, once absolute and dangerous, retreated slightly each night. A small circle of light created a boundary where vigilance could relax. Injuries could be tended, tools could be repaired, food could be prepared rather than consumed hastily. The constant urgency of daylight survival loosened its grip, if only for a few hours at a time. Time itself expanded. Nights were no longer periods of enforced stillness. They became extensions of the day, filled with quiet activity and shared presence. In the glow of fire, early humans could look at one another rather than outward for threats. Attention turned inward, toward memory, gesture, and sound. Simple vocalizations gained rhythm and meaning. Experiences from the day could be revisited, not through instinct but through retelling. These gatherings marked a shift no fossil could fully capture. Knowledge began to move more freely between individuals and across generations. Techniques for finding food, avoiding danger, and navigating terrain were no longer rediscovered repeatedly. They were passed along. Mistakes could be warned against before they were made. Successes could be imitated without trial and error. Learning accelerated not through genetic change, but through shared experience. With fire, evolution's focus subtly changed. Physical adaptation slowed, while behavioral flexibility increased. Humans did not grow thicker fur, they learned to control heat. They did not evolve sharper night vision. They created light. They did not wait for teeth to change, they transformed food itself. Problems were no longer addressed solely by waiting for bodies to adapt over generations. They were met with immediate collective solutions. This altered relationship with the environment marked a turning point. Nature was no longer only something to endure, it became something to manage, influence, and occasionally resist. Landscapes could be modified deliberately, controlled burns, cleared undergrowth, and encouraged new plant growth. Campsites became familiar points in a shifting world. Mobility gained structure, guided by memory rather than reaction alone. Fire also deepened social bonds. Keeping it alive required cooperation and trust. Someone had to watch it while others slept. Someone had to gather fuel. Responsibility could be shared, and failure affected everyone. These shared risks and rewards strengthened group cohesion in ways that solitary survival never could. Yet the tool remained dangerous. Misuse could destroy shelter and attract enemies. Dependence on fire introduced new vulnerabilities. Losing it during migration or storms could mean sudden exposure and hunger. Mastery was never complete. It had to be renewed constantly. This tension kept humans alert, balancing benefit against risk. Through fire, humans crossed an invisible boundary. They were no longer shaped solely by the slow pressures of climate and competition. They began shaping their own conditions, even if imperfectly. The world did not stop being dangerous, but it became negotiable. In that flickering light, evolution handed over part of its role, allowing behavior to take the lead where biology once ruled alone. With the mastery of fire and the slow accumulation of shared knowledge, something profound began to emerge. Thoughts started to outweigh instinct. Actions were no longer dictated solely by immediate danger or reflexive drive. Decisions could be deferred, evaluated, and imagined before they were acted upon. Planning became possible, and with it came both opportunity and new vulnerability. The world had always been harsh, but now failure could arise not only from what could be seen, but from what could be imagined. Fear, once a signal of immediate threat, expanded into something larger. A predator hiding in the underbrush was no longer the only danger. The mind began to anticipate attacks, calculate risks, and even dwell on threats that might never arrive. Shadows stretched longer in the imagination than they ever did in the night. Anxiety became a tool as well as a hazard, driving careful movement and deliberate choices, but also consuming energy and attention in ways instinct never had. Survival was no longer guaranteed by speed or strength alone. It required foresight, reasoning, and judgment, skills that were still unevenly distributed among these early humans. Cooperation deepened as instinct lost its dominance. Claws and fangs, once primary means of survival, were replaced by hands capable of precise work, by communication that transmitted strategy across a group. Hunting required planning, dividing labour, and timing attacks. Care for the young, the weak, and the injured was no longer optional. It became a survival imperative. Groups that could not coordinate or share effectively perished quickly. Success now depended as much on social cohesion as on individual skill or courage. The introduction of thought carried its own peril. One miscalculation, one misjudged plan could have catastrophic consequences. A poorly timed migration could leave a band without food. Misreading the terrain or weather could lead to exposure or starvation. Even the creation of a tool involved risk. One sharp edge misused could injure its maker or destroy a resource. Thinking introduced unpredictability into an already unstable equation. Evolution had added a potent new variable, and it could not yet predict whether it would increase survival or hasten extinction. This shift also demanded new forms of learning. Observation alone was insufficient. Memory, abstraction, and imagination became crucial. Mistakes could now ripple beyond the individual, affecting the entire group. Knowledge had to be stored mentally and passed carefully to prevent loss. Oral traditions and rituals began as practical tools, yet they carried the seeds of culture, giving shape to collective intelligence in a fragile and still evolving framework. Imagination opened doors that instinct could never have approached. Humans could anticipate weather, plot hunts across unfamiliar terrain, and create shelters before storms arrived. They could innovate tools, experiment with fire, and test new strategies. Yet every innovation carried risk, because a misapplied idea could threaten the group more than a predator ever could. Planning became a double-edged sword, granting unprecedented power while amplifying the consequences of error. Even social hierarchy shifted under these pressures. Leadership could emerge through insight rather than dominance, and respect could be earned by foresight as well as strength. Groups capable of strategic coordination survived, while those relying on brute force alone dwindled. This marked a decisive departure from prior patterns of evolution, where physical prowess had been the main criterion for survival. In replacing instinct with thought, evolution introduced both freedom and fragility. Humans could now mold their surroundings, shape their own destiny, and pass knowledge across generations, but they were no longer buffered solely by reflex. Every day carried new uncertainties, and each choice carried weight. The species had become conscious of its own vulnerability, aware that misjudgment might not only injure one member, but imperil all. It was a dangerous upgrade, yet necessary. Instinct had guided life for eons, but thought promised a path beyond mere survival. For the first time, the future of a species depended not only on adapting to the world, but on envisioning it, planning for it, and cautiously shaping it. The margin between brilliance and catastrophe had never been thinner, and humans now walked it deliberately, with nothing but each other and their growing intelligence to tip the balance. As thought took root and planning became routine, another quiet transformation began, one that even evolution could not fully oversee. The tools humans created started changing faster than the bodies that wielded them. A sharpened stone, once crude and laborious to make, gave way to finer edges, more complex designs, and techniques that spread across groups faster than genetic traits ever could. Hands that had evolved slowly over millennia now held implements that gave their owners power far beyond what their physical form alone allowed. Biology could not keep pace. Culture began to outstrip the slow rhythm of physical evolution. Knowledge accumulated, stored in memory, and shared through imitation, storytelling, and demonstration. Behaviors, skills, and customs could now survive independently of heredity. Unlike fur or jaw strength, ideas could leap generations instantly, reshaping survival strategies overnight. Social structures, rituals, and cooperative networks allowed humans to occupy environments that no primate had survived without major anatomical change. Learning replaced instinct as the primary adaptive mechanism. In this emerging reality, evolution no longer had sole control. Bodies were still molded by natural selection, but it no longer dictated the species' trajectory entirely. New challenges were often met with ingenuity rather than mutation. Fires were maintained, weapons improved, shelters constructed. Knowledge flowed faster than gene pools could. Evolution had ceded its authority to human innovation, and with that freedom came unpredictability. The species could now manipulate circumstances in ways that no other creature could, sometimes circumventing the pressures that had once sculpted life so meticulously. This shift carried extraordinary risk. Humans were, in essence, experimenting with themselves. Each new invention, each altered behavior had the potential to either enhance survival or introduce disaster. Mastering fire, organizing hunts, storing food, or developing early shelters were all forms of evolution conducted outside the body. The species became a self-directed organism, capable of bending environments to its will, yet fragile in the sense that poor decisions could cascade rapidly across groups. A misapplied idea could not be undone by generations of natural selection. It could annihilate entire populations. Dependency on culture also altered the stakes for social cohesion. Knowledge became a collective asset, and groups that could communicate, teach, and retain information thrived. Those that failed to do so fell behind, sometimes fatally. Leadership, collaboration, and memory were no longer optional traits. They were essential for survival. The survival of one depended upon the attentiveness and intellect of many. Evolution had given humans the foundation, but it was human ingenuity that now determined the course of life. Through this process, humans became architects of their own evolution. Bodies remained important, but they were no longer the sole instruments of survival. Minds, communication, and shared understanding assumed a central role. The species could inhabit cold tundras, arid plains, and dense forests not by growing thicker fur, stronger bones, or sharper claws, but by shaping tools, constructing shelters, and strategizing collectively. Adaptation had shifted from the slow geometry of mutation to the immediate realm of conscious action. Yet the gamble was immense. With evolution's guiding hand loosened, errors carried higher costs. Knowledge could be lost through accident, conflict, or misjudgment. Innovations that failed could imperil entire groups. Unlike physical evolution, which works across countless generations, cultural failure could extinguish hope in a single generation. Humanity was learning that freedom from biological constraint also meant a new kind of vulnerability, one shaped by thought, behavior, and choice rather than muscle and bone. In surrendering control, evolution allowed humans to surpass it, and in doing so, created a species simultaneously empowered and exposed. The trajectory of survival became an intricate dance of innovation, memory, and foresight. Humans were no longer solely the product of nature. They had become participants in their own creation, walking a path fraught with risk but brimming with possibility. For the first time, the species was not only adapting to the world, it was actively reshaping itself, testing the boundaries of what life could achieve when the rules of biology were no longer absolute. After millennia of relentless change, the pace of physical evolution in humans began to slow, almost imperceptibly. Bodies that had once been reshaped repeatedly by environmental pressure and survival challenges now retained their forms across generations. Limbs, skulls, and internal organs stabilized. The rapid experimentation that had characterized the early stages of hominin development, upright posture, large brains, dexterous hands, gave way to a prolonged period of relative consistency. It was as if evolution, having taken its daring gamble, paused to observe the consequences of its risk. This period of stasis was unusual in the natural world, where the pressure to adapt rarely relents for long. Other species continue to shift, evolve, and vanish. Humans, however, had achieved a level of behavioral and technological sophistication that partially insulated them from the immediate demands of biological change. Clothing, fire, tools, and communal knowledge now mediated survival, buffering bodies from some environmental pressures that might have otherwise driven further physical adaptation. In a sense, evolution had shifted from shaping flesh to shaping culture, from sculpting bodies to influencing the ways humans interacted with their surroundings. Yet, this pause raised profound questions. Stability did not necessarily indicate success. Without the constant push of environmental necessity, the body remained well suited for many conditions, but it did not grow stronger, faster, or more resilient in any dramatic sense. Traits that had once been honed by repeated bottlenecks, the ability to endure cold, hunger, or long migrations, remained largely unchanged. Perhaps the species had reached an optimal balance for its time. Perhaps the equilibrium was temporary, a fragile interlude before the next upheaval arrived. Across the globe, humans faced diverse environments: forests, plains, deserts, mountains. Despite this variety, their anatomy remained remarkably consistent. Variation occurred, but not in ways that fundamentally altered survival capabilities. Teeth, bones, muscles, and brain size had largely reached a plateau. New pressures no longer produced wholesale physical change. Instead, adaptation occurred through ingenuity, social cooperation, and incremental improvements in behavior and technology. Evolution, in effect, had ceded much of its traditional role, observing the experiment it had set in motion while allowing culture to guide immediate outcomes. The silence also highlighted the precariousness of this phase. Humans were now dependent on accumulated knowledge, social networks, and tools for survival. Their bodies, once the primary instruments of endurance, were less able to respond rapidly to extreme stress or sudden environmental shifts without assistance. Disease, famine, or climate volatility could still challenge populations dramatically. The pause in biological innovation did not guarantee immunity from extinction. It only signalled a temporary lull in the planet's relentless testing. Some historians of nature might interpret this stillness as triumph. The species had survived repeated near-extinction events, mastered fire, developed complex social structures, and created tools to extend its reach across continents. Others might see it as a suspenseful interlude, a holding pattern before the next test. Evolution had set the stage for humans to wield unprecedented influence, but it had not removed the underlying vulnerabilities. The experiment was ongoing, and outcomes remained uncertain. For tens of thousands of years, the human form remained a witness to its own stability, a quiet testament to survival amid previously unimaginable odds. Evolution's hand had slowed, yet it had not entirely released its oversight. It was waiting, patient and impartial, to see whether this fragile, intelligent species would continue to thrive, or whether the pause was merely the calm before the storm. In this silence, the story of humans became a narrative of observation, endurance, and cautious expansion. The body no longer demanded constant re-engineering. The mind and culture had become the driving forces of adaptation. And while nature appeared to have stepped back, the world continued to test humanity in subtle, unyielding ways, leaving the ultimate verdict still unresolved. With the slowing of biological evolution, humans began to extend their reach in ways no other species had attempted. They moved into forests, deserts, mountains, and tundras, occupying lands that had once been inhospitable. Where instinct alone had set limits, culture, tools, and collective knowledge now allowed expansion beyond the natural constraints of the body. Every new environment became a testing ground, and every success further reinforced the species' unique capacity to defy the rules that governed other forms of life. As humans spread, they brought unintended consequences. Animals that had evolved in delicate ecological balances suddenly found themselves displaced, hunted, or outcompeted. Entire species vanished quietly, leaving only faint traces in the soil or fossilized remains. Humans did not always intend to eradicate these creatures. Often, survival itself required it. Yet the cumulative effect was profound, a cascade of extinctions that reshaped the world in ways evolution alone had never orchestrated. Habitats changed, predator-prey relationships shifted, and ecosystems were altered almost invisibly, like the gentle yet irreversible turning of a tide. The planet itself began responding to this new force. Forests were cleared, fires were managed or spread unintentionally, and human activity influenced the flow of water and soil. In time, even the climate began to bear the mark of human presence. Local changes in temperature and rainfall occurred as forests were removed or cultivated. Patterns of wind and precipitation subtly shifted in response to alterations in vegetation and the introduction of agriculture. Humans were no longer just inhabitants, they had become active agents in the shaping of their world. This increasing influence carried risk as well as power. Each expansion into a new region presented unknown challenges. Disease could travel faster than anticipated, new predators could appear, and extreme weather could wipe out settlements unprepared for local conditions. Yet despite these dangers, humans continued to move, adapt, and manipulate the environment in a feedback loop of growing complexity. The experiment, which had begun as a fragile primate on the plains of Africa, had now become something almost uncontrollable. The consequences were neither fully understood nor predictable. Cultural innovations and technological advancements spread faster than populations could fully master them. Fires, tools, and early structures amplified human impact, often in ways that were irreversible. Each generation added new layers of influence, creating conditions that no single mind, or even species, could fully comprehend. Nature itself, once the sole arbiter of survival, was now a partner in an unpredictable dialogue, responding to human presence but also shaping the limits of human possibility. By the time humans had reached every continent, the scope of their effect was enormous. Islands and isolated ecosystems that had survived for millennia were suddenly exposed to a species capable of rapid adaptation and persistent pressure. Extinctions became a regular consequence of expansion, and the balance of life shifted in ways that evolution alone could no longer regulate. The delicate checks that had governed natural selection were now supplemented, and sometimes overridden, by intelligence, planning, and ingenuity. it was a dangerous and unprecedented situation. The very traits that had allowed humans to survive, innovation, cooperation, imagination, also made the species capable of overreach. With each conquest of new land or resource, humans were testing boundaries that evolution had not prepared them for. The experiment was no longer confined to small groups or local ecosystems. It had become global, dynamic, and increasingly uncontrollable. In this stage, humans were no longer simply part of the natural order. They had become forces within it, capable of reshaping the rules themselves. Yet the freedom to act so decisively carried uncertainty. The species' own ingenuity could threaten its stability as much as it ensured survival. Expansion had made humans powerful, but it had also amplified the stakes of every choice, turning the ongoing experiment into something far larger and more unpredictable than the sum of its parts. Nature had ceded control, yet it still exerted influence through feedback loops that humans could not fully anticipate. The story of survival had shifted into a story of dominance, responsibility, and risk, a story in which the consequences of action extended far beyond any single lifetime, altering life on Earth in ways that even evolution had not designed. After all the changes, all the near-extinctions and all the inventions, the question of purpose remains. Intelligence emerged slowly, quietly, and at enormous cost. For every advantage it provided, there was an equivalent burden: prolonged childhoods, constant hunger, the weight of imagination, and vulnerability to misjudgment. It is impossible to say whether evolution intended this outcome, or if humans are simply the result of a series of improbable accidents, each compounded by survival against staggering odds. Was the emergence of thought a deliberate masterpiece of natural selection, or a reckless gamble teetering on the brink of failure from the start? Humans stand as evidence of both triumph and uncertainty. The species has endured where instinct alone might have failed. Fire has been harnessed, knowledge shared across generations, and environments transformed to suit the needs of survival. Yet, with every innovation came new risks. Decisions once made in a fraction of a second now carry consequences that can echo across generations. Intelligence has not guaranteed safety, it has amplified responsibility and exposure. Evolution's control has loosened, leaving the trajectory of the species less certain than ever. There is no definitive answer to whether evolution has won or lost. On one hand, a fragile primate that should have disappeared long ago has become the dominant species on the planet. On the other, humans remain vulnerable, subject to the whims of disease, climate, and conflict, their fates intertwined with the very systems they manipulate. The experiment continues, now partially self-directed, and the outcome is still unknown. The line between success and failure has blurred, leaving only a sense of suspense that stretches across millennia. As humans look back, or as we reconstruct the story from a remnants of bones, tools, and fire-scarred earth, we are left with more questions than answers. Are we the final form of evolution, a species that has reached the pinnacle of adaptation? Or are we a warning, proof of the cost of intelligence, the fragility of life when foresight and recklessness collide? Perhaps these answers will never come. The measure of success may not lie in strength, speed, or size, but in the delicate balance between survival and the awareness of how perilously it was achieved. In reflecting on the journey from fragile primate to world-shaping thinker, there is a quiet beauty to the risk that evolution took. Millions of years of trial, error, near-extinction, and innovation converge in humans as both anomaly and continuation. The story is neither fully triumph nor fully cautionary. It exists in the tension between the improbable and the inevitable, a record of a species that was allowed to step outside the usual rules. Perhaps what matters is not certainty but observation. Humans are living evidence that evolution sometimes steps back, allowing behavior, culture, and intelligence to guide the outcome. The gamble has not ended, and the narrative continues in each choice, each adaptation, and each moment of fragile survival. And in that quiet reflection, one can imagine the final note that evolution has left. Perhaps this was not the end of evolution, but the moment it stepped aside. The story lingers softly, inviting contemplation, leaving the listener suspended between awe, mystery, and the enduring rhythm of life continuing in its own unpredictable way. The modern world often feels quiet in a way no other age has. Lights glow steadily through the night, food arrives without a hunt, and danger has been pushed far from daily life. To someone looking back across deep time, humanity appears to have reached a kind of stillness. Our bodies seem unchanged from those painted on cave walls or buried beneath ancient soil. We walk upright as they did, think with similar minds, and carry faces that would not look entirely unfamiliar tens of thousands of years ago. In this calm surface, many people sense a pause, as if evolution itself has taken a breath and stopped moving. When people say that humans have stopped evolving, they rarely mean it in a precise biological sense. What they usually mean is that change no longer announces itself clearly. There are no dramatic new limbs, no sudden transformations, no visible steps away from what we already are. Compared to the fossil record, where bones shift shape and species rise and vanish, modern humanity feels frozen. The idea is comforting in some ways, suggesting arrival, completion, or even perfection. But it also carries a quiet unease, as if something natural has been interrupted by comfort, technology, or choice. Part of this feeling comes from misunderstanding how evolution works. Evolution is not a force that rushes forward or seeks improvement. It is slow, patient, and almost invisible on the scale of a single lifetime. For most of human history, changes unfolded across thousands of generations. Slightly stronger immune response here, a subtle metabolic adjustment there. No one living through those moments would have noticed anything at all. Only much later, when bones were uncovered and genes compared, did the movement become clear. In the modern age, time itself feels compressed. We measure change in years, not millennia. Technology evolves faster than biology ever could, creating the illusion that the body has been left behind. When phones transform every few years, but humans remain recognizably human, it feels like stagnation. But biology does not compete with machines. It moves according to a different rhythm, one that does not align with headlines or inventions. Beneath the surface of apparent stillness, small changes continue their quiet work. Human immune systems adapt in response to new diseases. Populations exposed to different diets process food in slightly different ways. Some groups digest milk easily into adulthood, while others do not. Resistance to certain illnesses increases over generations. Even traits linked to altitude, temperature, and sunlight continue to shape subtle differences in how bodies function. None of these changes reshape the skeleton dramatically, but they matter deeply for survival. There are also changes happening at levels that cannot be seen at all. Gene frequencies shift slowly, influenced by environment, culture, and chance. Brain chemistry adapts to stress, social density, and patterns of sleep. The modern world introduces new pressures rather than removing them entirely. Noise, artificial light, sedentary lifestyles, and constant stimulation create selective forces unlike anything in the past. The body responds not with dramatic redesigns, but with quiet adjustments that take generations to settle. The sense that evolution has stopped may also come from the way modern societies protect life. Medicine allows people to survive conditions that would once have been fatal. This does not halt evolution, but it changes its direction. Traits that once would have disappeared now remain part of the human story. Selection becomes gentler, more complex and less cruel, but not absent. Nature has not vanished. It has been filtered through culture, ethics, and choice. Stillness in nature is often deceptive. A calm lake may appear unmoving, yet beneath its surface currents flow, temperatures shift, and life continues its unseen labour. In the same way, humanity's apparent pause hides constant motion. The absence of visible transformation does not mean absence of change. It simply means that the changes are happening at a scale too slow, too deep, or too subtle for everyday awareness. Perhaps the idea that evolution has stopped says more about how humans see themselves than about biology itself. We live in a moment that feels final because we experience it from within. But every generation before felt similarly modern, similarly complete. They too believed the world had settled, only to be followed by changes they could not imagine. Still water can run deep. In the quiet of the modern human form, evolution continues its patient work, indifferent to whether it is noticed or not. For most of human history, survival was never guaranteed. Each day opened with uncertainty, and each night carried risk. Early humans lived close to extinction, not once, but repeatedly. Droughts emptied the land, cold ages tightened their grip, predators watched from the dark, and disease moved unseen through small groups. Survival depended on constant attention to the environment. Those who could not endure hunger, cold, or injury often left no descendants behind. Evolution moved sharply in such a world, shaped by pressure that never fully eased. In that ancient landscape, even small advantages mattered. A body that conserved heat more efficiently, hands that could grip tools more precisely, or lungs that tolerated thin air could mean the difference between life and death. There was no safety net beyond the group, and even the group was fragile. Entire populations vanished without leaving a trace. Human evolution during these times was not dramatic because it was fast, but because the cost of failure was absolute. Then, slowly, something changed. Humans learned to shape their surroundings instead of surrendering to them. Fire pushed back the cold and darkness. Clothing allowed fragile skin to survive harsh climates. Shelters separated the body from wind, rain, and predators. These inventions did not alter human genes directly, but they softened the world's grip. The environment, once an unforgiving judge, became more negotiable. Survival no longer depended solely on the body's raw capacity to endure. As these comforts accumulated, the harshest filters of natural selection weakened. A child born smaller than average could survive near a fire. An injury that once meant death could heal with rest and protection. The human body was no longer required to solve every problem alone. Tools and culture stepped in, carrying part of the evolutionary burden. Over time, this shift altered the way selection worked, slowing its visible pace without stopping it. The arrival of medicine marked another profound turning point. Infections that once swept through populations now met resistance in the form of knowledge rather than immunity alone. Conditions inherited through genes no longer guaranteed early death. Vision could be corrected, organs repaired, and fragile infants kept alive. Traits that once vanished quietly now remained, carried forward into future generations. Evolution did not end here, but it grew more complex, shaped by human choice as much as by nature's indifference. This change leads to an unsettling question. If technology shields us from the consequences of biological weakness, has it replaced natural selection itself? The answer is quieter than it first appears. Technology does not remove selection, it transforms it. New pressures emerge where old ones fade. The ability to navigate social systems, manage stress, and function within dense populations becomes increasingly important. Mental health, attention, and emotional regulation now influence survival and reproduction in subtle ways. Selection has shifted inward and outward at the same time. Comfort, too, brings its own challenges. Bodies shaped for movement now sit still for long hours. Diets once scarce now overflow. Artificial light blurs the boundary between night and day. These conditions create mismatches between ancient biology and modern life. Not everyone adapts equally, and those differences matter. Evolution works here as well, but its effects unfold slowly, almost invisibly across generations. The idea that survival has become optional is only partly true. Death has not disappeared, it has changed its shape. Instead of sudden starvation or exposure, risk accumulates quietly through lifestyle, environment, and long-term disease. Selection no longer strikes swiftly, but it continues to shape who thrives, who struggles, and which traits persist. Comfort may feel like a pause, a softening of nature's voice. Yet beneath the blankets of technology and safety, biology still listens, still responds. As the world grows quieter on the surface, deeper currents continue to move, and as sleep approaches, one question lingers gently in the mind. Is comfort truly evolution's pause button, or just another chapter written in softer ink? There were moments in the deep past when humanity nearly vanished entirely. Not just once, but many times the human story thinned to a fragile thread. Volcanic winters darkened the skies, ice ages locked water away, and long droughts emptied familiar landscapes. During these periods, the total number of humans on Earth may have dropped to only a few thousand, scattered and isolated. These were not brief hardships, but long eras of pressure, where survival was uncertain from one generation to the next. Such events are known as bottlenecks. times when populations shrink so drastically that only a narrow slice of genetic diversity remains. Those who survived were not necessarily stronger or smarter in obvious ways, but they carried combinations of traits that happened to fit the moment. Tolerance to cold, resistance to disease, adaptability in diet, and the ability to cooperate in small groups became essential. When the world became hostile, there was little room for variation. Survival filtered humanity again and again. Each bottleneck acted like a gate, closing behind those who passed through. Traits that did not fit the harsh conditions disappeared silently with the people who carried them. Over thousands of years, this repeated filtering shaped a species that was unusually resilient but also unusually uniform. Compared to many other animals spread across continents, humans show remarkably little genetic variation. The differences between people living far apart are small when measured against the vast span of time they represent. This helps explain why modern humans look so similar across the world. Skin color shifts with sunlight, facial features adapt slightly to climate, and bodies vary in size and proportion, but the underlying structure remains the same. A human from one continent can recognize another instantly as kin. This sameness is not a sign of stagnation, but of survival through extreme narrowing. What remains is what endured. Some scientists suggest that humanity passed through a kind of final filter during these ancient crises. After that point, the traits necessary to be human were already in place. Language, social bonding, problem-solving, and emotional depth formed a stable foundation. Instead of continuing to change biologically in dramatic ways, humans began to change culturally. Tools, stories, and traditions evolved faster than genes ever could, carrying adaptation forward through knowledge rather than flesh. This creates a delicate question about genetic stability. Stability can mean success, a form so well suited to flexibility that it no longer needs radical redesign. But stability can also resemble stagnation, especially when viewed from the short window of recorded history. If bodies do not change, it is easy to assume that evolution has stopped. Yet stability itself can be an evolved state, maintained because it works. The fossil record shows long periods where species remain mostly unchanged, interrupted by brief bursts of transformation. Humans may be living in one of those long plateaus. The absence of visible change does not mean the absence of selection. It may simply mean that the form reached during deep prehistory continues to meet the demands placed upon it, especially when combined with culture and cooperation. Looking back, it is possible that the hardest test has already been passed. The ice, the ash, the hunger, and the silence of near-extinction shaped a species capable of enduring uncertainty. What followed was not an end to evolution, but a change in how survival expressed itself. The most intense filters may belong to a world long gone. As the night grows quiet, the thought settles gently. Perhaps the great test ended long ago, and what remains is not a species waiting to change, but one learning how to live with what it has already become. When people imagine evolution, they often picture bones changing shape, faces lengthening, limbs growing longer or stronger. The image is visual and dramatic, drawn from fossils laid out in museums and diagrams that show bodies transforming step by step. This has created a quiet myth that evolution must be something we can see. If the human form looks the same as it did thousands of years ago, the assumption follows that nothing important is happening. But much of evolution has never been visible at all. Even in deep prehistory, many of the most important adaptations left no mark on bone. The chemistry of the brain, the efficiency of the immune system, and the way the body manages energy do not fossilize. Yet these invisible systems often determine survival more than skeletal structure ever could. A slightly faster immune response, a calmer stress reaction, or a metabolism better suited to scarce food could quietly shape who lived long enough to pass on their genes. In the modern world, this inner landscape continues to change. Human brains adapt chemically to different patterns of social life, stress, and stimulation. Populations exposed to constant noise, crowding, and artificial light show subtle shifts in sleep cycles and hormone regulation. These changes do not alter the skull, but they influence how people think, feel, and cope. Over generations, such pressures can leave lasting genetic traces. Immunity offers another clear example. As humans spread across the globe, they encountered new diseases, parasites, and bacteria. Each exposure created selective pressure not on appearance, but on immune defenses. Some populations developed resistance to certain illnesses, while others remained vulnerable. These adaptations are written into the immune system, shaping how bodies respond to infection without changing outward form. The scars of past epidemics live on inside cells rather than on faces. Diet, too, has quietly guided evolution beneath the skin. As humans shifted from foraging to agriculture, and later to industrialized food systems, bodies adapted in small but meaningful ways. Enzymes adjusted, gut bacteria changed, and metabolic pathways responded to new sources of energy. The ability to digest milk into adulthood, to process starch efficiently, or to tolerate periods of abundance and scarcity all reflect internal adaptation. These traits matter deeply, even if they cannot be seen in a mirror. Climate has also shaped the body from the inside out. Temperature, altitude, and humidity influence how blood carries oxygen, how heat is managed, and how fluids are regulated. People living at high elevations develop differences in oxygen processing that allow survival where air is thin. Those in extreme climates show internal adjustments that support endurance, rather than altering overall shape. The body becomes a system tuned to its environment quietly and precisely. These inner changes may matter more now than ever before. In a world where tools and technology handle much of the physical labor, survival depends increasingly on regulation, balance, and resilience. The ability to manage stress, resist disease, and maintain metabolic health influences lifespan and reproduction. Evolution follows these paths, subtle and slow, shaping the systems that keep the body functioning rather than the form it presents. Appearance can remain stable while everything beneath it shifts. This is not stagnation, but refinement. A machine does not need to change its casing to improve its performance. In the same way, the human body continues to adapt internally, responding to pressures that are less visible but no less real. As night settles in, these changes move on without sound or signal. Cells adjust, systems respond, and genes whisper forward into the future. Evolution does not announce itself. It works silently, in the dark, where the most important changes have always lived. For most of human history, the environment was something vast and external. It was the land beneath the feet, the sky overhead, the changing seasons, and the animals that shared the space. Survival depended on reading these signals correctly and responding with care. Evolution followed the pressures of this natural world, shaping bodies and minds to match its rhythms. But over time, humans began to build a different kind of environment. One made not of forests and rivers, but of walls, roads, and light. Today, that built world surrounds nearly every human life. Cities rise where plains once stretched, and glowing screens replace firelight as the last sight before sleep. Artificial light turns night into an extension of day, while constant noise hums in the background of daily life. These conditions are not neutral. They apply pressure just as cold, hunger, and predators once did, but in quieter and more complicated ways. Evolution requires pressure to act, and those pressures still exist. The difference is that they no longer arrive as sudden threats but as constant exposure. Screens demand attention for long hours, training the brain to switch focus rapidly. Information arrives faster than it can be fully processed, rewarding speed over depth. Over time, this favors certain cognitive patterns, shaping how attention is held and released. These changes may not be visible, but they influence behavior, learning, and stress response. Cities introduce another layer of selection. Dense populations increase exposure to pathogens while also providing access to medicine and resources. Social navigation becomes essential, as success depends on cooperation with large numbers of unrelated individuals. Noise and crowding elevate stress hormones, and those who regulate these responses more effectively cope better with urban life. Evolution does not disappear here. It responds to these conditions in subtle ways, shaping resilience rather than strength. Artificial light alters one of the oldest environmental signals of all, the cycle of day and night. For millions of years, darkness told the body when to rest. Now, light delays sleep, shifts circadian rhythms, and shortens recovery time. Some bodies tolerate this disruption better than others. Over generations, traits linked to sleep regulation, hormone balance, and energy management may quietly change. guided by the constant glow of modern life. Shortened attention spans and fragmented focus are often described as cultural problems, but they may also carry biological consequences. Brains adapt to the tasks they perform most often. Environments that reward rapid scanning and quick responses may favour neural patterns suited to speed rather than reflection. This does not mean improvement or decline, only adaptation. Evolution has never judged direction, only fit. This raises an unsettling question. Are humans now adapting more to machines than to nature? In one sense, yes. The immediate environment that shapes daily survival is increasingly technological. Yet machines are not separate from nature. They are part of the environment humans have created, just as nests are part of a bird's world or dams reshape a river. Evolution does not distinguish between what is natural and what is built. It responds to what exists. The forests and plains may no longer define daily life for many, but the environment has not vanished. It has transformed. Pressure remains, quietly shaping bodies and minds to meet new conditions. As the world hums softly with artificial light and distant signals, evolution continues its work, adapting not to what the Earth once was, but to what it has become. Around 70,000 years ago, something remarkable appeared in the human story. Bodies emerged that looked almost exactly like those walking the Earth today. The skull took on its modern shape, the jaw softened, and the skeleton settled into a form that would endure. From that point forward, change slowed to a near standstill, at least on the surface. Bones buried in ancient ground differ little from those of people alive now. This long stretch of sameness can feel puzzling, as if evolution simply paused and decided the work was done. Before this moment, human history was filled with variation. Different hominin species walked the land at the same time, each carrying its own shape and survival strategy. Some were sturdy and powerful, others small and agile. Then, within a relatively short span of time, those branches faded, leaving one form behind. Modern humans spread outward, carrying a body that seemed complete enough to last. From the Stone Age onward, the blueprint remained largely unchanged. This stability does not mean the absence of evolution, but it does suggest a shift. The human body reached a balance between efficiency and flexibility. Upright walking, dexterous hands, and a brain capable of complex thought formed a combination that worked in many environments. Instead of continuing to change biologically, humans began to change the world around them. Adaptation moved outward into tools, clothing, and shelter, rather than inward into bone and muscle. Cultural evolution began to accelerate in ways biology never could. Knowledge passed from one generation to the next without waiting for genes to follow. A discovery made by one group could spread across continents within lifetimes. Fire, hunting strategies, and social structures evolved rapidly, reshaping survival without altering anatomy. The body stayed the same, while behavior transformed again and again. Language played a central role in this shift. With speech came the ability to store experience outside the body, in memory shared through words. Stories, instructions, and warnings could travel through time without requiring biological change. A child did not need new genes to learn a new skill. They needed only to listen. This allowed humans to adapt at the speed of thought rather than the pace of generations. Ideas began to evolve faster than flesh. Myths changed, tools improved, and societies rose and fell, all while the human form remained constant. The brain itself did not grow larger or smaller, but it learned to operate within increasingly complex systems of meaning. Culture became the primary driver of survival, shaping success through knowledge rather than physical alteration. This long plateau can look like stagnation, but it may instead reflect efficiency. When a form works well across many conditions, radical change is no longer necessary. The environment shifts, but humans respond through innovation rather than mutation. Evolution did not stop, it handed responsibility to culture, allowing biology to rest while ideas carried the momentum forward. As night approaches and the world grows quiet, the thought settles gently. Bodies remain much as they were when the first stories were told, but the stories themselves never stop changing. They continue to evolve, drifting forward through time while the human form listens, steady and still. For most of life's history, evolution moved without intention. Traits survived or vanished through forces that did not pause for fairness or mercy. Hunger, disease, and chance shaped every species, including early humans. No one chose which characteristics would endure. Nature decided through survival alone, and the cost of failure was often final. Yet over time, humans began to interfere with this process. Slowly at first, then with growing confidence. The first shift came through choice. Unlike other species, humans select partners based on preference rather than proximity alone. Attraction, social bonds, and cultural rules shape who reproduces with whom. These decisions influence which traits spread, sometimes favouring qualities unrelated to survival in the natural world. Creativity, kindness, or status may matter as much as strength or endurance. Selection becomes guided by values rather than necessity. Medicine deepened this change. Illnesses that once determined fate can now be treated or prevented. Injuries that would have ended a lineage no longer do. Children born with conditions that once led to early death now survive and thrive. This does not eliminate evolution, but it alters its direction. Traits remain in the population that nature once removed swiftly. The process becomes slower, gentler, and shaped by care rather than cruelty. As a result, genetic diversity has expanded instead of narrowing. Modern humans carry a wider range of traits than many ancient populations did during times of hardship. Diversity increases resilience, offering many possible responses to future challenges. What appears to be a weakening of selection may instead be a widening of possibility. Evolution spreads outward rather than narrowing inward. Ethics now stand between biology and consequence. Societies protect the vulnerable, valuing life beyond utility. This is a profound interruption of nature's traditional methods. Evolution has always been efficient but indifferent. Human choice introduces compassion into a process that once operated without it. This does not stop change, but it reshapes the path it follows. With new tools, the question grows sharper. Are humans beginning to design their own future traits? Genetic testing, reproductive technology, and emerging therapies offer the ability to influence outcomes before birth. These choices remain limited and uneven, but they signal a turning point. Evolution, once blind, now encounters intention. The species begins to reflect on its own design. This control is incomplete and uncertain. Technology introduces new risks as quickly as it solves old ones. Ethical limits slow what is possible, and unintended consequences linger in every decision. Humans may guide evolution, but they cannot fully command it. Chance, environment, and time still play their roles. As the night settles, the image softens. Evolution continues, not as a force imposed from outside, but as a process shaped gently by human hands. It moves more slowly, more thoughtfully, carrying choice alongside chance, and leaving the future open rather than fixed. Evolution moves at a pace set by generations, not moments. Changes accumulate slowly, shaped by small differences in survival and reproduction that repeat over long stretches of time. For most of human history, the world changed at a speed the body could follow. Climate shifted gradually, landscapes transformed over centuries, and new challenges emerged slowly enough for biology to respond. The rhythm of life and the rhythm of evolution stayed loosely aligned. That balance no longer holds. In only a few centuries, humans have transformed the planet more dramatically than in tens of thousands of years before. Cities appeared, machines reshaped labour, and global systems connected distant places almost instantly. Diets shifted from scarce and seasonal to constant and abundant. Light erased the night, and movement gave way to stillness. These changes arrived far too quickly for genes to keep pace. Evolution cannot respond to conditions that change within a single lifetime. A body adapted for one world may find itself struggling in the next, not because it is flawed, but because it was built for a different set of demands. The human body is still tuned for long walks, irregular meals, and deep rest after dark. Modern life asks for sitting, constant consumption, and alertness at all hours. The mismatch creates quiet strain. This gap between biology and environment shows itself in many ways. Metabolic systems designed to store energy now face endless supply. Stress responses meant for brief danger remain activated by constant pressure. Sleep cycles shaped by sunrise and sunset drift under artificial light. None of these systems are broken. They are simply outdated for the world they inhabit. Genes respond slowly, requiring many generations to shift in meaningful ways. Civilization, by contrast, reinvents itself within decades. Each new technology adds another layer of demand before the body has adjusted to the last. Evolution does not fail here, it waits. In the meantime, humans live in a state of adjustment without resolution, adapting behaviorally rather than biologically. Culture fills the gap where genes cannot. Medicine manages symptoms, routines attempt to restore balance, and technology offers temporary solutions to problems it helped create. These fixes allow survival, but they do not rewrite the body's design. The ancient blueprint remains, carrying expectations shaped by a long-gone world. This speed problem may define the modern human condition, not a lack of evolution, but an excess of change. The environment races ahead while biology follows at its ancient pace. The result is a species constantly catching up, using thought and tools to compensate for what genes have not yet had time to adjust. As the day fades into night, this realization settles quietly. The human body rests, still shaped for open land, firelight, and long silence. It carries the memory of a world that no longer exists, moving through the present with a design borrowed from the deep past. Evolution moves at a pace set by generations, not moments. Changes accumulate slowly, shaped by small differences in survival and reproduction that repeat over long stretches of time. For most of human history, the world changed at a speed the body could follow. Climate shifted gradually, landscapes transformed over centuries, and new challenges emerged slowly enough for biology to respond. The rhythm of life and the rhythm of evolution stayed loosely aligned. That balance no longer holds. In only a few centuries, humans have transformed the planet more dramatically than in tens of thousands of years before. Cities appeared, machines reshaped labor, and global systems connected distant places almost instantly. Diets shifted from scarce and seasonal to constant and abundant. Light erased the night, and movement gave way to stillness. These changes arrived far too quickly for genes to keep pace. Evolution cannot respond to conditions that change within a single lifetime. A body adapted for one world may find itself struggling in the next, not because it is flawed, but because it was built for a different set of demands. The human body is still tuned for long walks, irregular meals, and deep rest after dark. Modern life asks for sitting, constant consumption, and alertness at all hours. The mismatch creates quiet strain. This gap between biology and environment shows itself in many ways. Metabolic systems designed to store energy now face endless supply. Stress responses meant for brief danger remain activated by constant pressure. Sleep cycles shaped by sunrise and sunset drift under artificial light. None of these systems are broken. They're simply outdated for the world they inhabit. Genes respond slowly, requiring many generations to shift in meaningful ways. Civilization, by contrast, reinvents itself within decades. Each new technology adds another layer of demand before the body has adjusted to the last. Evolution does not fail here, it waits. In the meantime, humans live in a state of adjustment without resolution, adapting behaviorally rather than biologically. Culture fills the gap where genes cannot. Medicine manages symptoms, routines attempt to restore balance, and technology offers temporary solutions to problems it helped create. These fixes allow survival, but they do not rewrite the body's design. The ancient blueprint remains, carrying expectations shaped by a long-gone world. This speed problem may define the modern human condition. Not a lack of evolution, but an excess of change. The environment races ahead while biology follows at its ancient pace. The result is a species constantly catching up, using thought and tools to compensate for what genes have not yet had time to adjust. As the day fades into night, this realization settles quietly. The human body rests, still shaped for open land, firelight, and long silence. It carries the memory of a world that no longer exists, moving through the present with a design borrowed from the deep past. Long ago, humans were a species scattered across continents, living in small, isolated groups. Each population faced its own challenges: harsh deserts, frozen tundras, dense forests, or high mountains. Evolution acted locally, shaping bodies, immune systems, and metabolisms to fit very specific environments. Over time, this produced subtle differences between groups: slightly taller, slightly darker or lighter, more resistant to certain diseases, or better suited to the climates in which they lived. Yet despite these differences, all humans belong to a single species, moving along shared paths shaped by survival. The story changed dramatically as humans began to travel, trade, and intermix. Populations that were once isolated encountered one another, and genes flowed freely across continents. Local adaptations, which had once sharpened differences, now began to blend. The traits that had defined survival in one corner of the world no longer mattered in the same way when people carried diverse backgrounds into a single community. Skin tones, immunity, and metabolism became mosaics, composed of many threads from many places, rather than markers of a single evolutionary path. Today, evolution rarely acts as a simple directional force. It is no longer about one clear set of traits being favoured above all others. Instead, it works statistically, subtly, across vast populations. Some genes rise in frequency, others decline, but the pattern is diffuse and complex. Survival depends not on rigid specialization, but on the interplay of countless small advantages spread across a global network of people. Adaptation has become probabilistic rather than absolute. This fragmentation means that there is no longer a single way to be human. In one city, people may carry genes that helped ancestors survive famine. In another, genes suited for high-altitude living predominate. Across the globe, these threads intertwine, producing diversity within the human species while still maintaining unity. Evolution continues, but it no longer favours a single path, a single design, or a single direction. The process is quiet and subtle. It does not announce itself with new limbs or dramatic forms. It moves through populations in patterns that are statistical, measurable only over generations. Survival is shaped by networks, communities, and environments that now include both nature and culture. Traits that once guaranteed life in isolation are now part of a much larger tapestry interwoven and shifting constantly. Perhaps the most profound aspect of this new pattern is its openness. There is no destination, no final design toward which humanity moves. Instead, evolution unfolds along many threads at once, each responding to local pressures, cultural contexts, and chance events. There is no single ideal human, only a landscape of possibilities that continues to stretch outward in all directions. As the night deepens and the world grows quiet, the thought settles gently. Evolution did not stop, it simply fragmented. Multiple paths exist simultaneously, weaving a rich and complex story. The human form rests in its present shape, but beneath the surface countless threads continue to move, to adjust, and to respond. There is no single goal, no predetermined outcome, only many paths, each quietly unfolding into the future. Throughout the long history of life on Earth, evolution has rarely moved in a steady, unbroken line. Instead, it unfolds in fits and starts, with long periods of apparent calm punctuated by sudden bursts of change. Species may remain largely the same for tens of thousands of years, and then, almost without warning, the environment shifts, catastrophes strike, or new challenges arise that demand rapid adaptation. In this rhythm, long pauses are normal, and silence does not mean inactivity, it means preparation, hidden adjustments, and the accumulation of potential. Modern humans may be living in one of these quiet intervals. For millennia, our bodies have remained largely constant, and even subtle changes often go unnoticed. But the world we inhabit is shifting faster than ever before. Climate is warming, ice sheets are retreating, and weather patterns are becoming unpredictable. Oceans rise, deserts expand, and ecosystems rearrange themselves in ways that have no precedent in human experience. These environmental pressures may not have fully revealed their force yet, but the stage is being set for demands unlike any previous generation has faced. Beyond Earth itself, new frontiers appear to challenge the human form. Space travel introduces conditions for which no human body has ever evolved naturally: zero gravity, radiation exposure, and the need for life support systems. Adaptation may come through technology rather than biology at first, but over generations, selective pressures could favour traits that allow survival beyond our home planet. The body, once shaped only by Earth's rhythms, may now be asked to function in entirely new contexts. At the same time, humanity is beginning to intervene directly in its own evolution. Genetic engineering, reproductive technologies, and advanced medicine allow the potential to alter traits intentionally before they are even expressed. This is a kind of preemptive evolution, one guided by choice rather than survival alone. The pressures of the natural world remain, but humans are introducing entirely new forces into the process, mixing chance with design, randomness with intention. Yet despite all these possibilities, the next great wave of evolutionary pressure has not yet fully arrived. We live in a liminal period, a quiet between the storms. Bodies remain those built for life thousands of years ago, while the world transforms around them. Culture and technology buffer us from immediate danger, allowing survival while the pressures slowly mount. Genes may yet respond, subtly adjusting in ways invisible to the naked eye, but for now, change is latent rather than visible. This moment invites reflection. Perhaps evolution is not absent but paused, biding its time until new pressures demand a response. Every species experiences such interludes. Nature allows waiting, quiet observation, and preparation. The human species, unusually capable of shaping its own environment, may be experiencing the longest pause yet with the greatest shift still ahead. As the night deepens, one thought lingers in the mind, soft and unhurried. Is this merely the calm before a sudden turn? The world has not stopped changing, and neither has evolution. It may simply be waiting, silent and patient, for the next moment that demands it to act.